Nigerian, a Nigerian activist, human rights activist, and I'm based in France at the moment. I welcome you all to this session on intersectionality and impunity, particularly to locate SOGI human rights in the context of a broader human rights framework. Before we start, I'd like to let you know that we will be filming this session, and then if you do not wish to be filmed, please indicate and let my colleague here, Ulysses, know that you do not wish to be filmed. This session is particularly very important right now, given the very difficult times that we're having around the world relating to LGBT human rights promotion and protection, and particularly based on the situation of laws that are being promulgated in Nigeria, in Uganda, in Russia, as well as decisions to tighten homophobic laws in countries like Kenya. Today we are very privileged to have brilliant panelists with us today. I have some colleagues from India, Malaysia and Nigeria will be speaking on the panel, and also those who have been really busy with international advocacy and capacity building of human rights defenders here with us. We'll be introducing them in the order of their speaking, and then you'll know them better. So the first speaker for today would be Tilanda. Tilanda is a queer activist from Malaysia. She works with the Sexuality Merdeka, and then she would be speaking with us. She'll be letting us, informing us about the work that she does there in Malaysia and the context in which they work there. Thank you, Tilanda.
Hello. Hello. Yeah. Okay, good morning everyone. My name is Tilaga and I'm from Malaysia. So I'm with Sexuality Merdeka and a few other organizations in Malaysia because we are so under-resourced and we have it's a very small group of people working on different things. So you see us everywhere. So I guess, I'm openly queer. And I guess we agree that I'm not just a lesbian or a queer person. I have different identities as well. I'm also, although I'm not gender conforming, I guess I'm a woman. And I'm also a young person, I guess. I also belong to, I also have like different identities, yeah? So and the interaction of these different identities have different impacts on the way that I am treated in society and the kind of access that I have to services and rights. So there are many, just going back to Malaysia, there are many direct laws that discriminate LGBTIQ persons in Malaysia. So we have colonial laws such as the Penal Code 377 that criminalizes carnal intercourse, not just for gay folks, but for everyone, right, across the board. We also have Sharia laws that prohibit cross-dressing, sexual relations between men, sexual relations between women, public indecency laws and such. In addition, in many cases, there are also other laws that are used and appropriated to target LGBTIQ spaces and to regulate our participation in public spaces. For instance, LGBTIQ spaces are vulnerable to raids, especially clubs, saunas, and things like that. And the raids are conducted under the Dangerous Drugs Act. Yeah. The city council and the government also shut down establishments that predominantly has gay clientele by picking on registration and licensing of these establishments. So this also prevents us from doing our work on safer sex. This also prevents our safer sex work because these establishments do not want to, have condoms or safer sex materials in their establishments because that would then attract more attention to them. So then this effectively really stops our safer sex prevention work. Aside from that as well, LGBTIQ persons are also affected by different restrictions of freedom, such as freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of media, and others. From where I come from, where these freedoms are restricted, it's even more difficult for us to repeal direct laws such as 377, or to talk about laws that prohibit cross-dressing, because that there is no space for us to organize, for us to mobilize the community, or to change public opinion. And on top of that, then you have media that demonizes, that would demonize the LGBTIQ folks as, deviants. So that's an additional problem. I would just like to also talk about the festival that I work with in 2011. Okay, so there are photos over here. In 2011, Sexuality Merdeka, which is an LGBTQ festival that we organized in Kuala Lumpur, which is the capital city of Malaysia, was banned because we were deemed as a threat to national security, and because we could potentially cause racial disunity. In the media, we were completely demonized, and we were completely rebranded as a free sex party that was planning to organize orgies. It is also important to note that the lady over there, the woman, her name is Ambika Srinivasan, and she was the former chairperson of Bersih 2.0, which is a movement for free and fair election. And she was invited that year, and this was the T-shirt. So that year our theme was queer without fear, and so we were literally going all out. We were really fearless. And we were banned, and we invited Ambika because, again, we thought it'd be interesting to just to locate LGBT issues in the larger democracy framework, because there was this woman and there's this vibrant movement calling for fair and free election. And so, we felt that we shouldn't be excluded in this larger, call for democracy and call for fair and free election. So then we thought, it'd be a great idea to invite her to officiate our event. But unfortunately, it was taken, there was a huge backlash, and, we were banned. And following that, there were posters all over the city of her and of other people from Bersih, including Anwar Ibrahim, who was recently convicted for sodomy and sentenced to 5 years of prison. So it says here, a vote for Ambika is a vote for free sex or promiscuity or immorality. So this has happened in Malaysia, and this was just in 2011. Just last week, a similar, just last week as well, this just happened last week. A festival in Penang was just called off. This was another closed-door private event that was supposed to take place, but the poster was exposed by some of the extremist groups in Malaysia. And so that was the original poster, and on top of that, Songsang actually means deviant, and Banta means protest. So, the Muslim groups were calling for these groups to be investigated. And we're very lucky because our friend from Suara, a human rights organization that also co-organized the event, stepped forward to manage the situation. So they sort of stepped forward to say that, we will protect everyone else and we will take one for the team. So, which was really, really nice. So in order for us to create a positive environment for LGBT persons, I think we also need to work on all these different freedoms so that we are able to organize, mobilize, and build our community. Because otherwise, we won't be able to get people to come out or come together to speak up on all these different issues. And also there won't be any opportunities to change public perception. So just going into intersectionality a bit, as much as we adopt a gender lens and we take on a class perspective in our human rights work, I think as human rights defenders, we should also adopt and embrace principles of non-binary, where we know that gender is a spectrum and not just male, female, right? And non-heteronormativity. And also be sensitive to the language that we use. For instance, a cisgender person, we shouldn't say that we are normal and, trans people are abnormal, right? So, being sensitive to that language as well. And also talking about intersectionality, I think just as much as we are outraged by female genital mutilation, we should be equally outraged when multiple surgeries are performed on intersex babies, without their consent. Because so that they can fit perfectly into this gender binary and gender norms. Similarly, prohibition of sex reassignment surgery. I cannot say this word for the life of me. I was practicing last night. Pathologize. Can someone say this for me, please? Pathologize. I cannot say it. So that word, pathologize. Oh my God. Okay, I'm gonna stop. So you know what I'm saying of gender identity and abortion. All of it removes our bodily autonomy. So, there are different ways of looking at the same issues. In April 2011, there's also another thing that I would like to show you. In April 2011, the State Education Department selected 66 boys, 66 effeminate boys to attend a boot camp so that they can to man them up. So these kids were between the age of 13 to 17, and they were selected based on their gender expression or perceived sexual orientation. These kids, they were picked out. It wasn't even during school holidays. It wasn't during summer break or anything like that. It was during schooling hours. They were picked out of class and they were sent to this boot camp. Well, we don't know because of all the public reactions that the public outrage. There was a public outcry because of this camp. We don't know if this camp. There were plans to continue this camp and make it an annual event, but we don't know if it's going on. But we know for a fact that if, camps of similar nature are still being organized in higher learning institutions, and people are still being targeted based on gender expression. And done? Are we done? Good. Hold on. Just one more thing. Also, like in Malaysia, I think we're very fortunate because the human rights organizations work very well together. For instance, for the UPR, the coalition of NGOs in the UPR, Comengo, included every human rights issues that it could think of in its report. So it was very, in addition, the SOGI groups, we also submitted a separate report for the process, for the review. This was great because we got to condense our information. We had like a simplified version in the larger Comengo report, which had all the human rights issues, and we had a separate full-fledged report that we submitted. And this was really great because we got to piggyback on Comengo's work, and it really opened up doors in terms of lobbying for us and provided access to places that we would have not gotten access to because of the capacity and the resources that we have. We also, interestingly, we got to attend a briefing session with members of the opposition party at the parliament and meetings with embassies as well. Just one. Just last one. I'm just gonna just one more. So these are and because of Comengo's support, and I just want to say this, because of Comengo's support for LGBTIQ person, they have received, Comengo has received a lot of backlash from the extremist groups. This one over here, it's this one group called ISMA, and they pledged 1 million supporters in nationwide anti-whatever, so you get that, right? And this is one of their campaigns where they simplify the Comengo report and the demands. So one of it is to demand recognition of deviant culture, which is LGBT. And there are a few other things. Can I, the next one? And so they also then named all the 54 NGOs that supported Comengo, which is part of the coalition. So that was all named. And, sorry, can we go back, please? And also, these 9 people with the photographs are not even involved in Comengo. But then they were named and their photos were publicized in the media. and in social media spaces. And at the last sentence here, they specifically call on Muslims, not anyone else. They call on Muslims and they use this racial sentiment to call on people to put aside, they actually literally say this, we need to put aside our differences and come together strongly to reject Komengo's demands. Yeah, so the next one, sorry. And these are the posters that they made, and there are more posters which they made. And the last one is, so this is that. And just go to the last one, sorry.
Should I scroll
Yeah.
back?
And so this is a recent campaign that was mooted by the Body Shop. And this was in conjunction of the International Women's Day. And if you see, Ambiga is in the campaign, and Marina Mahade, who's also an ally, who she's officiated our Sexuality Merdeka events. And so these are all allies of Sexuality Merdeka and allies of LGBTIQ people. And because of this campaign, the Muslim group ICARH, whatever they're called for a boycott, a nationwide boycott of Body Shop. Because if Muslims were to buy products from Body Shop, that means they are supporting LGBT rights. So this happened recently, and there was no response from the government or from anyone towards like boycotts like this. So in conclusion, I would like to say that the government should play a role of a facilitator instead of a adjudicator that does not take extreme position based on the majority's view or the assumption, whatever assumption that it makes of what the majority wants. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Tilaga. That was quite rich. I find it very interesting the issues of freedom of association, freedom to information that you actually encountered during your work there. I think we're going to come back to questions, and then you'll be able to talk more about the backlashes that Komengo has just by supporting your work in Malaysia. The next speaker would be Ifeanyi Orazolike. He's my compatriot from Nigeria. He works with the International Center for the Advocacy of the Right to Health. And then he will be speaking on the situation in Nigeria. And also, as we know that Nigeria just recently passed a law to prohibit same-sex marriage, and also advocacy in relation to LGBT human rights in the country. So Ifeanyi will be giving us a head up on that. Thank you very much. 8 minutes, please. I would appreciate your respect.
All right, great. Good morning, all. Like Joseph said, my name is Ifeanyi Orazolike. I'm from Nigeria, and I work with the International Center for Advocacy on Right to Health, and we're also a member of the Alliance for Solidarity for Human Rights in Nigeria, which is an LGBTI coalition working on human rights issues for LGBTI people. I'm going to be talking on impunity and the Nigerian perspective, also the broader perspective, and the civil society action. As we all know, in January 7th, 2014, the president signed the same-sex prohibition bill, which now becomes a law. And the law itself the title is different from the content of the law, which talks about aiding and abetting, which talks about organizations providing services and its sustenance. That also could lead up to 10 years imprisonment, and people providing services get up to 14 years imprisonment. And since the bill became a law, we have recorded lots of violations, mob attack, and arbitrary arrest happening, and detentions happening in and around Nigeria, which includes on the 27th of January in Bauchi State, which is in the northern Nigeria. The 6 people who were facing trial at the Sharia courts had mobs outside the courts throwing stones, demanding that the people be handed over to them. and the court premises was shut down based on that, and the people were sent back to prison. And after that incident, the police did not arrest anybody. The police did not bring the perpetrators to book. And this is part of what we are talking about in terms of impunity. Beyond that, we have also recorded on the 12th and 13th of February, there was also a huge mob attack of about 40 persons who attacked LGBTI persons, gay men living in Gishiri, which is located somewhere in Abuja, and 14 of them were severely beaten. About five of them were arrested that night. This happened at about 1 a.m. in the night, simultaneously on the 12th and on the 13th. And the people, as we speak at the time, lost their homes, could not go back to the village because they were told if they come back, they are going to be killed. Even when that happened, they were handed over to the police detained them and released them the next morning. And up until now, as we speak as well, the perpetrators have not been brought to book, even though we've written petitions on this issue. There is a lot happening. Police also has been extorting money from members of the communities who have been arrested over time. And the law in question that we're talking about has not been gazetted. So we keep asking this question: how do you want to persecute or arrest someone over a law that has not been gazetted yet? It is just a law that has been signed by the president. And since the law was signed by the president, there has been no public statement from the presidency saying, like what we saw in Uganda, which was a huge ceremony when Museveni signed the law. For Nigeria, the reverse was the case, because the law was signed on the 7th of January, and we all got to know on the 14th of January, so it took us another 7 days to know that the law was signed. So it was signed in secret. And these are things that we have asked questions about. What is the motivation? Because no one had asked for marriage. No one has even come out publicly to demand for same-sex marriage or demand for our rights. Yesterday we were having a conversation, and ILGA said we have even gone beyond to say you can reduce it, just have our rights be protected. This is all we have asked for. But beyond that, what we get is something different. And this has brought also about the issue of service provision, like in the clinics that we have, particularly in Abuja. The number of people who also visit the community centers that we have in 5 states in Nigeria has reduced. I would give the instances of Abuja from 30 per week to almost nothing. Recently we have between 5 or 6 people who drop in, once, which is also a huge concern for us, because if we say we want to get rid of HIV and AIDS, and we are not doing that with the most at-risk population, particularly men who have sex with men, then we have a lot of issues in our hand to deal with. Going by all this, on the 7th of March in Nigeria, we also hosted, which happened. This is a global event. We also organized Global Day of Action to talk about these issues around the world. We printed T-shirts. People made statements around the world condemning this law, which we feel is politically motivated. And beyond that, the people who made the law are not the ones suffering the law. The people who are suffering the law are young people. Particularly, all the arrest that has happened amongst young people between the age of 13 up to 16 and 17, or even going up to 20. And some of these people are people who have migrated from their home to the bigger cities to seek refuge, to seek greener pasture, and they are faced with all this violence and attacks, and nothing is being done about it. We have written severally to the police. We have written severally to National Human Rights Commission talking about this issue. What can be done? How do we deal with this? I know that Nigeria Human Rights Commission has the power to review the law, which we have gone to seek their audience and ask what they can do. Although since that act was passed, they have never done that. So we felt, okay, the LGBTI issue might be the first issue to bring about that, but it's obviously political because the executive secretary had said, oh, we have never done this before and doing this right now, you know, but we see what we can do. All you can do is submit a petition, which we just did recently, and we will be following up on that. A lot has happened, particularly in terms of the broader perspective on in the African states, you know, being on this defensive note against this, calling it a Western culture, and governments around Africa are imposing the homophobic laws amongst its citizens. Because if last week I was in a meeting where we have a group of lawyers and we were talking about this, and we asked how many lawyers have read the so-called law, and none of them could raise up their hands. So these are big issues. We say that 97% or 98% of Nigerians has agreed that the law be passed. And we asked, which law? Is it the one they know about or the one they do not know about? Because what people are interested is in the issue of marriage, which already marriage has been defined in our constitution. So going further to define marriage is one question that we are asking. Is this constitutional? And if people really understand, the few people we have tried to get to read the law always come back to say, okay, if this is what it is, I don't think this is what we wish for a better Nigeria. Because this goes beyond witch hunting LGBT people, but this gives open door to blackmail and extortion, which is coming through gradually. People are beginning to blackmail other people and also extort money from them. A lot is happening around in Nigeria, not only in Abuja, but also in other states. People are being arrested. A lot of people are spending money to bail themselves from the police. And nothing is being done about that. Like I said before, we had called on the police several times, particularly on the Gishiri incident. I was at the police station talking with the DPO himself, and he said to me, oh, we know what the law says about this, and you know, they have gone to the village to confirm, and they said, yes, that these people are gay people, and they are very, very effeminate. And our question directly to the DPO was, is that a basis that people should be attacked, not even being attacked in the daytime, but at an ungodly hour by 1 a.m. when people are supposed to be sleeping? This is what we call breaking an entry, and people should be charged. So up until now, that hasn't happened. On the final note, going by the civil society action, we are calling on the Nigerian government. We are willing to give an African voice to this. This is not a Western agenda. There are people there are citizens of Nigeria who are affected by this and also infected by this. And we need to look at the economic implication to this as well. We are also interested in seeing how we can turn the discourse around, calling on the African Union, because all these rights are also protected in the Nigerian Constitution and in the African in the African Charter as well. And we also have initiated a strategic campaign against violence and impunity targeted at persons on the basis of their suspected sexual orientation, gender identity, or even gender expression. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ifeanyi. Something very interesting that you mentioned, and I think the question might come back to you, is that the law is not gazetted yet. So what is does it mean, what can we do in terms of advocacy to ensure that this law is not gazetted? And what is the implication of that to the law being implemented? It's going to come back to you, just know that. The next speaker would be Heather. Heather, you lead the work at International Service for Human Rights related to LGBT human rights defenders. It'll be interesting to hear your perspective on this issue of intersectionality and impunity particularly. Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph, and thanks everyone for coming here this morning. So the point I want to make in my presentation this morning is that the rights of LGBTI people are not exceptional, they're not something special. All human rights defenders, including LGBTI defenders, are engaged in the same struggle to promote the human rights of all persons. So I do want to, of course, acknowledge the fact that work is being done to counter the idea that LGBTI human rights are exceptional, and we've heard examples from Tilaga and Ifeanyi this morning. But I also do want to, through my presentation, be encouraging the idea that human rights defenders working on a range of issues should be doing more to make connections between the different kinds of work that they're doing. So as Joseph said, I work for International Service for Human Rights, and I'd like to start by drawing out some of the interconnectedness between different groups of human rights defenders from our particular perspective. So ISHR works to support human rights defenders to access and use the human rights systems at international and regional levels. And we try to support defenders in their advocacy to use those systems to promote their domestic issues. And what's come through very clearly in the course of working with human rights defenders is that certain groups do face particular obstacles. They face maybe more obstacles than others in trying to promote the rights of particular groups and communities. There's a whole range of these groups, but we focus on 4 particular groups of human rights defenders in particular. So they are defenders working on issues of corporate accountability, defenders working in states in transition, women human rights defenders, and human rights defenders working on LGBTI issues. And the reason why these particular groups of defenders face exceptional difficulty in promoting their rights is that they're running up against deep societal biases and prejudices and interests. So, for example, if you look at defenders working on issues of corporate accountability, they're directly confronting vested economic interests. And we've seen cases where human rights defenders have been attacked by government officials on the basis that they're trying to delay or hinder the economic development of their country. Likewise, if you look to women human rights defenders, they're running up against patriarchal attitudes that have structured many societies for centuries. And it's very difficult in those circumstances for women's voices to be heard, for them actually to promote their rights, because they're confronting, for example, religious and powerful community leaders in doing so. Likewise, when we look at LGBTI defenders, they're running up against that same patriarchal system and also norms around sexuality and gender. So these societal biases make it really difficult for these defenders to be actually claiming their rights, and in addition make it much more likely that they're suffering threats, attacks and harassment for their work. And often those threats, attacks are happening because the perpetrators know that they're not going to face accountability for their actions. So we've heard from Ifeanyi, for example, about in Nigeria how that's played out with LGBTI defenders, that attacks are being perpetrated with impunity because of those biases in the society that are meaning that perpetrators can just get away with attacking those groups. And of course, when human rights violations happen and they're not pursued, that accountability does not happen, it means that those very biases in society that the defenders are trying to counter are actually reinforced. So for us, impunity is actually what's lying at the basis of what all of these different groups of defenders are running up against. And once we realize that, we see that there's a great deal of interconnectedness between, or potential for interconnectedness between the work that these different groups of human rights defenders are doing. So I just want to, for example, turn to the case of Uganda. Obviously, the anti-homosexuality law that was passed there has received a great deal of attention, and rightly so. But if we look at other issues in the country, we saw that the anti-pornography law was passed, and that imposed a dress code on women, for example, and that's led to women being harassed in the streets. Likewise, we've seen civil society working on environmental, land and corruption issues in Uganda as well. For example, an NGO called the Uganda Land Alliance being targeted by government officials. They've been threatened with deregistration, threatened with arrest, and they've been accused of sabotaging government programs. And this is all taking place within an even broader crackdown on civil society, again, that's symptomatic of this underlying culture of impunity. So the Public Order Management Act was also passed in Uganda, which has placed restrictions on freedom of assembly, it's restricted freedom of expression, and it's limiting an already restricted space for human rights defenders and civil society. So this whole range of legislative and policy measures is actually stemming from these same fundamental underlying factors. Things like lack of an independent judiciary, lack of resources to conduct proper investigations, lack of training for police and judiciary, for example. So while all these different groups of human rights defenders are obviously pursuing their own agendas, be it corporate accountability or LGBTI rights, it also does make sense for them to be looking at ways of collaborating to address these deep underlying issues, because it's only through eradicating those issues that defenders actually get the tools to promote their own specific agendas. And so we at ISHR, for example, really encourage defenders working across these issues to be working together. And maybe I could just briefly mention one particular project, for example, that we're working on in this regard. This is a project to develop a model law on the protection of human rights defenders. The idea is to create an enabling environment for human rights defenders working on a whole range of issues. The idea would be that with this model law, states have the tools to develop laws, policies and institutions at the national level to support the work of human rights defenders, but also human rights defenders working on these whole range of issues have these tools in common that they can use to strategize around and promote actions against impunity. While lots of good work is going on about developing interconnectedness between different groups of defenders, and we saw examples as well from Tilaga in particular about how SOGI groups have been working with more mainstream, so-called mainstream organizations. We also, unfortunately, are finding cases as well in our own work where SOGI defenders, the sexual orientation and gender identity, are complaining that they feel excluded from mainstream work. And there's this idea that their rights are exceptional, as I mentioned earlier. But that's clearly not the case. These defenders are seeking the same rights as other groups, the right to freedom of assembly, the right to freedom of expression, association, and so on. And in claiming them, as I said, they're running up against these same fundamental issues. So this perception really needs to be countered because it's extremely detrimental to the work of LGBTI defenders. At the national level, it's meaning that they're getting even more excluded. So if other groups are coming together to work together and LGBTI defenders are being excluded, that's obviously even more perpetrating those sort of prejudices against these groups. And at the international level, it's meaning that many states are putting up this sort of false argument that LGBT rights are exceptional rights and they don't actually exist as such, which is not at all the argument that LGBTI defenders are trying to make, but it's being used to obstruct progress at the international level. So maybe if I can just conclude with a recommendation to states that, of course, it's really important that you continue to raise and condemn examples of LGBTI people and defenders being attacked. It's important to continue to speak out against heinous legislation that's being promulgated, but be aware that this is not solely an LGBTI issue, that other groups are also suffering as a result of the fundamental underlying causes that enable targeting of defenders and marginalized groups in society. And contextualizing statements in that way will help to counter that idea that this sort of misperception of exceptionalism. If LGBTI defenders can be targeted in this way, it means that others can also be targeted, and it's to the benefit of all to work together to bring attention to those underlying factors and work together to address them. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you very much. That's very interesting. I also think that perhaps the question might come to you as regards kind of expanding certain mandates within. For special rapporteurs. I think the audience might be particularly interested in that, particularly special rapporteurs on minority issues and even human rights defenders issues. So I think it would be interesting to hear your opinion on that. Sunita, you've been working for over 17 years on sexuality issues and feminist issues. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your work and how it relates, the intersection to LGBT human rights advocacy and how you do with that career? Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph, and good morning, everyone. My name is Sunita, and I work with CRIA. We're based in New Delhi. CRIA is also part of the Sexual Rights Initiative, and we work here at the Human Rights Council. What I'm going to do is, I'm not going to talk about CRIA's work per se, but I'm going to talk about the intersectionality and trying to locate sexual orientation and gender identity within the broader sexuality framework. and also trying to locate it within the broader democracy kind of space. And I think some of the things that I'm going to say has already been said by the speakers before me, but just bear with me on that front. Why I think that locating SOGI issues within broader sexuality framework is useful is because it helps us understand how society, and therefore also laws and policies, because it's people who belong to the society really that frames them, discriminates, stigmatizes and punishes people on the basis of their sexual choices, gender identity and gender expressions. And really this is very crucial to understand, because it is seen as transgressing some norms that society sets. So for instance, if you look at sexual choices, it's choice of a partner, so whether it is a same-sex partner, or it could be even opposite sex, but within communities that are very strict about class issues, caste issues, interreligious marriages or choice of partners within the same ethnicity or not. I mean, and these are huge issues. So while for some people it may be the issue may be of same-sex choices, for others it could be some other choices that they have made, and so it's very important to understand this. The sexual choices also could be long-term committed as opposed to casual multiple partners, and there are very a lot of restrictions and punishments that are given if you transgress the norms that are set. It could also, the sexual choices also could be because of the work one chooses. So for instance, sex workers or people who are in the pornography industry, because there are, again, these are people that are seen to be transgressing norms that have been set. We can look at gender identity and gender expression, and I think Tilaka has also made reference to it in terms of people taking on different identities or putting forward. It's not always that all identities are at equal play all the time. So what does it mean to be a man or a woman? Can you be a feminine man or can you be a masculine woman? Notions of that. I think transgender people, whether it is female to male or male to female, and I think that has been one of the biggest challenges to feminists, because when you think feminism, sometimes you only think women, and then how do you put trans people within that framework? And that has really kind of challenged feminists to also rethink what they see as who they see as women, or what they think as women. Also in terms of performing gender roles, so if you are a woman, what are the roles you're supposed to play? Do you transgress them? If you're a man, what are the kind of what's the role ascribed to you, and can you go beyond those boundaries? And I think what I find two important cases to illustrate what I'm trying to say here is the case, and I always say this, the case of a trans sex worker, or you can take a case of a Dalit lesbian. And I think this kind of speaks to what I'm trying to say in terms of sexuality and gender, identity and expression. So if you take a trans sex worker, yeah, and so how do you address? Do you address only the trans part, or do you also address the sex worker part? Because sometimes we tend to kind of address it separately. So do we segregate their lives into this sex working and non-sex working lives? Or can we address both these identities? Because both these identities for the trans sex worker are very, very important. We can also look at, because we know that the trans sex worker faces as much discrimination as for being trans, as much as for being a sex worker. So how do you it is a complicated issue, and how do we understand this complicated issue? If you take the case of a Dalit lesbian, so you look at caste issue. And I'm bringing this very specifically with reference to India, where caste is a huge issue. Anyone can say that it doesn't bother us, but only the privileged, those who have nothing to, or from an upper caste, can actually say this, that caste is not an issue for us. So if you are Dalit, your identity as a Dalit is set, and what you can do, can access is determined by that. But if you are lesbian, that is another identity that you hold. And when you put them together, it again becomes complicated. And in fact, you can complicate this further if you put education, so how much education or how educated the person is. You can put another layer, you can see in terms of poverty, what does it mean, how much access to resources does the person have, and you see the complications that it brings out. So therefore I think it's very important to understand in its entirety, in all its complexity. Otherwise we tend to address only one aspect of a person's life, and sometimes that is really not enough. In terms of locating SOGI issues within a larger democratic space, and like I've said, people before me have already addressed this, but it's really important to understand the culture of impunity. To understand the culture of impunity, we must understand what a democratic space means. Because sometimes we look at democracy and we say, okay, people have the right to vote, so it's a democratic country, and I think sometimes we reduce it to that. And that I think is a dangerous thing to do. We must look at, is there freedom of speech? Is there freedom of expression? Can we dissent without, being violent? Is there space for dissent? Is constitutional morality, upheld rather than a public morality? These are questions really when you're looking at democracy. Because where do we see gross violations, which are really at times very brutal, of people, whether it's LGBTI people or other people, based on their sexuality. It is likely to be in countries or regions where democratic spaces are either shrinking. There is no space for diversity or any kind of, speech, freedom of speech or expression, freedom of assembly, narrow definitions of family, and so on. So if you're really looking at advancing issues of sexual orientation and gender identity, we must be able to address these spaces and these issues as well, because LGBT people and their rights are located within a certain framing, and so we need to broaden these other framings as well. Because sometimes it has got to do directly with SOGI issues. So, for instance, anti-sodomy laws, how it is interpreted or used. It could be about same-sex marriage laws. It could be prohibiting or disrupting pride marches, and these are very directly related to what we see as LGBT rights, LGBT issues. But then it has also to do with what kind of public order does a country want to establish or portray to the world. Okay, so laws on obscenity, pornography, like Heather has mentioned, cross-dressing that ILGA has mentioned. So what kind of public order does the country want? How much space there is to dissent and move away from the norm. So if there are certain norms that are set, how much can we deviate or move away from that? How does a country or a state use religion to keep people in its right place? And I think religion is something that we have not engaged a lot with, and it's very important to a lot of people, and I think we don't recognize that enough. What kind of censorship laws prevail? So for all of us activists, those who work on SOGI issues, these are some things that we must be able to engage with as much as we can. And I just want to end by just giving a recent example in India, because a lot of us were involved in January after the horrible Supreme Court judgment. We were thinking, what should we be doing to, because it is really a shrinking space. And we actually got together and did an event called Either Public Reclaim the Republic. And I think it was great because there were 39 organizations, LGBT, non-LGBT, all kinds of movements, and got together to do a march and to gather and to kind of it's a protest. And 26th January is the Republic Day in India, where you celebrate all kinds of things. And for us, it was very important that to reclaim this space, and we want to do it as an annual event and look at all kinds of issues, all kinds of groups coming together. And that I think is very powerful, where all of us have a space. We have a special space within that, but also as people of the country, all of us together. And yeah, for the council, I think for states and for all of us to look at various things. I know one of the things that we've been talking about is statement on the protection of the family, and I think yeah, I mean, how does it affect, how inclusive can we make that, for all of us, especially for groups that are particularly excluded, like LGBT people. Thank you.
Thanks, Sunita. Something very interesting that you had mentioned is democracy, and democracy now being a game of a majority and not particularly equity. It'll be interesting to hear more about that subsequently before the end of this session. Michael, you're part of a team working on sexual orientation and gender identity issues at the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights. What contribution do you have to this issue? Thank you.
Okay. Many thanks, Joseph, and good morning to everyone. Thanks for the invitation to speak on the panel. So what contribution can the office make to this discussion, which I think is an important discussion in light of the ongoing discussions in the Council on the issue of sexual orientation and gender identity, and where to place this discussion in the broader debate around the protection of human rights. So, several panelists have already highlighted and emphasized this this morning, but obviously LGBTI persons are human beings. We are human beings like everyone else, and we're therefore subject to the full range of the protection of human rights that's enshrined in international human rights law. And these rights are inalienable, and they're all strongly interrelated. That is, the protection, you can't separate out the protection of some specific rights from others, because they depend on one another. And this is also valid with regards to the protection of the rights of LGBTI persons is also strongly linked to the protection of the human rights of all of us and of other groups. So the two main points I wanted to make in relation to in relation to this debate is one that has already been mentioned in the context of what ILGA, Heather Fayani, and Sunita mentioned around impunity, and that's that the protection of human rights relies on some really very basic building blocks of a national human rights protection system that relies on laws that are aligned with international human rights standards, on effective courts, judiciary, and law enforcement authorities that comply with human rights standards, on strong national human rights institutions working in line with the Paris principles, on a strong civil society that enjoys the freedom of peaceful assembly and association, and a free media that enjoys the freedom of expression. And this is underpinned by strong regional and international human rights systems that underlies this work at the national level. And this is critical if when we see in different countries where there's a weakness or several weaknesses, there's impunity, the laws contravene international human rights standards. There's strong restrictions on the freedom of peaceful assembly and association. It's all of the protection of human rights, but also the protection of the human rights of LGBTI persons that suffers. In terms of the approaches to the protection of the human rights of LGBTI persons, there's both a need for a specific approach, so focusing in on the specific violations of human rights that LGBTI persons face. And when we say that, and we've also heard different examples, LGBTI persons aren't a homogeneous groups. Lesbian women might face different violations than transgender persons might face, than intersex persons might face, or that gay and bisexual men might face. And these need to be documented, highlighted, because they require specific responses in light of these violations, whether they be laws that criminalize homosexuality or gender expression, violence or torture that is targeted at LGBTI persons on the basis of their gender identity or sexual orientation, or discriminatory practices in the private sphere that the state is bound to address as part of its human rights, international human rights obligations. And at the same time as the need to address these specific violations, there's also a need to address the violations against LGBTI persons in the broader cross-cutting work on human rights protection. And we've heard the importance, Heather mentioned that rarely is crackdowns on human rights defenders isolated to a single group. So we'll see that where there are violations against human rights defenders, these often target different groups that are seen for whatever reasons to challenge societal norms or government plans. So we see the interlinkages that are necessary there also in the linking the protection of the human rights of LGBTI persons to broader human rights agendas. And the same is true in relation to freedom of expression, assembly, and association. And the same is true on the work on sexual and reproductive health and rights, and Sunita highlighted these links. But this also goes in other areas that perhaps we were less, or we pay less attention to, areas like poverty or adequate housing, where we see that in certain contexts where there's high marginalization of LGBTI persons. For example, we have a lot of young homeless LGBTI persons who are excluded from society and have no access to livelihoods or to adequate housing as a result of this discrimination or the violence that they face, or the exclusion from their workplace, from their homes that they might face. I think Thilaga also made it very clear at the beginning of her presentation, LGBTI persons are not just LGBTI persons. They are also children, they are persons with disabilities, they are older persons, they are members of ethnic, religious minorities, they are members of castes that face discrimination, they are members of indigenous populations. And so we shouldn't also isolate the work on the defense and the protection of the rights of LGBTI persons from other work on other groups, because people do not fit neatly into single categories. And this is important also for the work at the Human Rights Council by states, by the UN and by civil society, in terms of not forgetting these interlinkages and the fact that as persons we have multiple identities and face intersecting and multiple levels of discrimination. How does this translate into the UN's work and the Office of the High Commissioner's work on this? Well, the Human Rights Council expressed some years ago already deep concern around instances of violations, human rights violations and discriminations against LGBTI persons. And both the High Commissioner and Secretary General have both very publicly as well as privately advocated strongly for state action to address some of these violations and the gaps in protection that we've heard today from the other panelists. The UN has highlighted 5 key priorities for states to address these gaps, and that's focusing on homophobic and transphobic violence and addressing these cases and addressing the impunity that we see when there are instances of mob attacks and violence, where these are almost normalized when the right to life is a right that all human beings have. And similarly, a second priority is addressing torture and cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment against LGBTI persons that they may face in the medical establishment, they may face in detention, or they may face in prisons. Repealing of criminal laws that target homosexuality either directly or indirectly, or gender expression, is another key priority for states. Prohibiting discrimination So we have anti-discrimination laws around the world, but the work on anti-discrimination has to also address sexual orientation and gender identity. And finally, very importantly, is to safeguard freedom of expression and association for all persons. So I'll just wrap up there, but with two key, I would say, points to bear in mind in this discussion. And that is, there's a real need to address this exclusion and the isolation of the LGBTI issue and LGBTI organizations in human rights work. And that is something in which we all have a role to play, whether it's the UN in its work on human rights, also addressing this issue, and we're seeing increasing work there, but also states and civil society organizations in their national work, but also in their work in international and regional forum, like the Council and the regions. And the second one is to strengthen the links in the practical work, in the technical work of the protection of human rights, and to integrate the protection of the rights of LGBTI persons in this broader work on human rights protection. Many thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. I'm going to open the floor for contributions or questions. So if you can, signify if you have questions or any contribution from the floor. Any question? Okay, in the absence of none, I had asked you. Oh, I didn't see that. I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead, John.
Thank you very much. John Fisher.